Well, hello and good morning. Welcome back to another virtual visit here at the Alaska SeaLife Center. Once again, I'm Alex, and we are joining you live from the Alaska SeaLife Center in Seward, Alaska. And as we do, we're going to show you what the sunrise was this morning. It is getting later and later every week, but we got some nice fog rolling on in. This is looking out south over Resurrection Bay, out towards the Gulf of Alaska. And of course, with these virtual visits, we always want to thank our sponsors as well. And so those sponsors are Royal Caribbean Group, as well as the Alaska Travel Industry Association Foundation. Now that we've thanked them, we can get underway with our program today. But I'm standing in front of some small habitats here at the SeaLife Center. In fact, we refer to these as our microhabitats. But we're not even really going to be talking about the critters in here. What usually goes in the microhabitats are our smaller animals, animals that you might miss if they were in larger habitats, or animals that might get eaten if they are in the larger habitats. But today we're going to be talking about even smaller animals. In fact, these are going to be the smallest animals that our aquarium staff hatches from eggs and raises, but they don't really go on exhibit for display. So we're going to jump on in on our first clip here and enjoy. All right, well, hello. We are back in West Curatorial, and that's an area behind the scenes, right, where we have animals maybe we're rearing or they're in quarantine. I'm joined by Leo, and we're actually back, like, if West Curatorial had its own West Curatorial, that's where we are now. It is the larval rearing room. And we're in front of kind of these weird, like, bubbling cauldrons of, what am I looking at, Leo?
So this is brine.
Brine, so like a salt water then.
So we call it brine, but it's actually brine shrimp. So they're tiny little shrimp that live in brine environments or the seawater.
All right, and so these little tiny shrimp, why do we have like 2 cauldrons of them?
Great question. So the way we harvest brine is a 2-cauldron system, and the first cauldron is for, this one's the first one, and that one has been sitting in there for just 1 day, and that first day allows all the little eggs to hatch, and then the second day we'll add some more food and let those baby brine shrimp called nauplii, or the larvae, eat all the food that we feed, so then by the third day they are ready to be harvested.
So this is different from other animals we have here, because a lot of animals we collect as, you know, adult stages, or at least like juvenile stages. These were hatching from eggs.
Exactly.
Why do we hatch them?
You know, a lot of the foods that we feed here are frozen. They're shipped from other places, and that's great. A lot of the animals like to shred them apart, or they just engulf the whole capelin. But we have a lot of other animals where a capelin would probably be like unfathomably large compared to their mouth size. We have tiny guys that are actually filter feeders, and filter feeders do not do a good job at eating large fish. So they need to be fed incredibly tiny, tiny small foods that can't be shipped. So we'll actually grow them here to support them.
Okay, so this is a food source then.
Exactly.
And it's like, I'll show it close up, because they're very tiny. Like, just looking at them, you don't know it's shrimp. It just looks like little bits of dust. So tiny food for tiny mouths is what we got going on. All right, sweet. So what do you have to do with this then? I can get out of your way.
So yeah, first thing is actually, we're in the middle of the process of 2 things, but every day, my day begins with kind of stopping the process of growth right now to kind of switch into collection mode. Right now, all the brine are just floating around, just having a great time eating food. And what we want to do is separate the cysts, which is like kind of like the egg of a chicken. We want to separate the eggs from the brine shrimp. So first step, we want to stop the air bubbles so all the brine shrimp can swim to the bottom, because right now this is very turbulent and they're just swimming everywhere, having a great time. So we want to stop that water current and air bubbles and all that jazz. Then the light source. It's going to come down here, just like moths attracted to the moon or your campfire. All these brine shrimps are all going to flutter down to the bottom where the light is. And finally, voila. And this way, there's only light at the bottom. All the brine shrimp will swim to the bottom, and that's how we can make a great harvest.
All right, well, welcome back. That was just the first part of Leo's morning here and our aquarium staff's process with these brine shrimp. That was kind of getting them set up for harvest. And we actually had to wait about 15 minutes before the next part of that. But before we get to that, I actually do have some little brine shrimp here. And we're going to take a look under a microscope that we have here, just a little USB microscope. Whoa, it's really in need of some focus right now. Give me a second there, folks. And as always, I will encourage that if you have any questions, please type those in the chat, or we would also love to hear from you. We do have a text number. It was at the beginning of the video, but also listed down in the description below. So if anyone's got any questions about these little brine shrimp, now what we're looking at now are actually the eggs. I'm going to try and zoom way in on them. So those are the eggs. And what we are going to be harvesting actually aren't even going to be the adult brine shrimp. It will take them a little while longer, but I can show you. I did prepare a little dish of what we do harvest. So there's still some eggs in there that just didn't hatch out. But we are looking at little larval brine shrimp. And as Leo mentions, these are called nauplii. And we have a great little life cycle clip here that we could show you, a picture from the Utah Wildlife Management group. And you can see here there's quite a few little stages. But the nauplii, kind of at the 4 o'clock position, that's what we were looking at on that microscope. And we can toss back to that microscope in just a moment, but you can see the adults don't look like what we have on the microscope. The adults kind of look a little more shrimp-like, but even still, these are very tiny little animals. The eggs are super, super small. In fact, I have the pipette. I'll show you what this is in just a moment, but this is the pipette coming into the view, just so you can see how large that is. And if we cut back over to my main camera, you can see this little thing I'm holding is the pipette. So that was the little tip that just came into view. So our brine shrimp are very small. We do get other planktonic animals in the SeaLife Center, either animals that reproduce here at the center, or of course we take seawater in from the Gulf of Alaska or from Resurrection Bay off of the Gulf of Alaska. And that water can bring in little plankton as well. So we do get other very tiny animals in the SeaLife Center. But these brine shrimp are probably the tiniest that we're deliberately hatching out. So we're going to harvest, and we're going to figure out why we're hatching them out in our second clip here.
Alrighty, so we are on stage 2 of brine shrimp harvest. So where we left off, we put the light down there, we put the cover on top, so it's dark up here, light over here, and all the brine shrimp will swim towards the light. Now they've all settled towards the bottom, and I'm going to be harvesting them. So what I will be using is handy dandy net. And so I'm going to be squatting over here and look at the bright light and hopefully not burn my eyes too much. And then harvesting the brine. Now the brine shrimp are swimming, trying to swim against the currents, but they will inevitably go into my nets. And then grab a container, fill it with some water. I'll rinse out the brine, rinse the outsides, and then dump them in. And then we'll do this on a repeat, maybe one more time. Rinse, 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 rinse. And then dump them back in here. And then I'm just gonna top it off so they have a lot of room to swim around and, more importantly, oxygen to breathe. And here you have it. Today's harvest of brine. Da, 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 da.
All right, so we just pulled these brine shrimp. And before we kind of go out and go feeding things, you've actually got to get set up for the next batch of brine shrimp, right? So we said we hatch them from eggs. So is that what we're going to see here is like setting up the eggs.
Exactly. So first, we just harvested this, so we got to clean this old tank, make sure it's nice and clean for the new batch of eggs that will be hatching. And then at the end of this process, we're going to be feeding the eggs that I put in yesterday and add some food for these guys so they will be a little bit bigger for tomorrow's harvest.
It's a lot of brine shrimp, right? And I know you've mentioned it before, I think, sea monkeys.
Exactly.
Right? You ever raised any critters called sea monkeys, maybe you got them from the back of a magazine? That's what these are. These are sea monkeys, or sea monkeys are brine shrimp. So what would you be feeding with these today? What's the plan?
Today we'll be feeding some jelly babies. Well, it's kind of hard to say what stage of a jelly is a baby, but there's the polyp stage where they kind of look like a sea anemone. They're stuck to the ground and they eat kind of like an anemone would. So we'll be feeding these guys. We'll be feeding the bigger Medusa jellies, the jellies that we're familiar with. It looks like a jellyfish. We'll be feeding those guys. And then a couple of microhabitats. They have a few filter feeders as well, like scallops and little anemones. We have some hairy tunicates that like to eat little brine shrimps. So those would be the friends that we'll be feeding today. All
right, well, we'll see if we can catch you while you're doing that. But otherwise, thanks for showing us how we grow the brine here at the SeaLife Center.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks a ton. Yep. All right, so we actually did end up catching up with Leo to watch as he fed out those brine shrimp. We'll get to that in just a moment. But you might have heard that he mentioned we were going to feed our some of our microhabitats, but also going to feed the baby jellies, right? The polyp stages of our jellies, as well as the adult jellies. And that's what we ultimately do with these brine shrimp. These brine shrimp, as Leo explained, are a food source for many of the either smaller animals at the center or animals that require small food. So many of our animals here at the center, they will eat, chopped up squid, chopped up fish. When we were at the touch tank in an earlier program, right, those sorts of things are going to get little bits of chopped fish and squid, maybe even little bits of krill. And those are pretty small chunks, but the hermit crab, they're able to go over and pull it apart, that sort of thing. The small anemones that we have in the tank, though, they're going to get brine shrimp. And if we have any barnacles in the building, they'll get brine shrimp. Anything that's a filter feeder or just very, very young. For example, if you had a fish with a very small mouth, like we have tube snouts here, they've got, as the name implies, a tube snout and just a little tiny mouth at the end there. Those are going to need very small food as well. And so when we used to work the touch tank, the old one, we actually had a little barnacle tank there. And that might come back on the new design, but we always had some brine shrimp in a cup there off to the side. And people would ask, what's in this little cup? Because you just look at it and it's these weird little pink specks. And it was brine shrimp. And so we would actually take that throughout the day, kind of dole it out into the water, and the barnacles could filter that out of the water with their feet, actually. If you've ever seen a barnacle feed, that part that reaches up is a foot to pull food down into the waiting mouth. So as I said, we did catch up with Leo a little later on to watch as he fed out that brine shrimp. So we're going to cut on over to our third and final clip today. Enjoy. You might have been here earlier when we harvested some brine shrimp from our system here at the SeaLife Center. These brine shrimp, really, really little. You might know them as sea monkeys, but Leo pulled those out this morning to be food for some of the animals here at the SeaLife Center. So we're going to be taking a look at some feeding of the brine shrimp to various critters at the center. All right, Leo.
Alrighty, so we will use this fancy-dancy turkey baster, and each tank of jelly polyps will get one turkey baster of brine shrimp today. So you might notice that this tank is actually a little bit more elevated, and that this one gets actually 2 turkey basters of food. And the reason why is we suspect that these guys might be getting ready to strobulate. If you look at them really closely, they're a little bit more plump, and they're a little bit bigger than the other guys. Frobulating is when, if you look at a polyp, it kind of looks like a sea anemone. And when they start strobulating, they'll start forming discs on top of each other, kind of like a stack of plates. And when they strobulate, each plate will pop off and they'll turn into an a-fish-ionado, which kind of looks like a snowflake. And this snowflake will eventually turn into a full plate that looks like that jelly. So this is where jellies will pop off and turn into the full Medusa form that we're familiar with.
They don't look like jellies.
At all.
No. And so when we tell people like, yeah, these are our jellyfish, it's just a different life stage for them. I think that's unexpected for a lot of folks. I love that there's like some rocks that they've coated, and then of course we have these plates that they grow on as well. All right. So now Leo and I are actually back, still in West Curatorial, but this is a little different because this is actually an exhibit we're going to be feeding now. So we're up at the top of the jelly exhibit with the adult moon jellies, or I guess the Medusa stage moon jellies, right? And so we're going to be feeding these, but just down on the other side is the window that people actually see these animals through. So I'll let you just feed there, but I imagine without a lid, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, it's all you got to do is make sure to pour the water into the tank. There are a few things to be careful of. Jellies aren't very strong, and so even the strength of an air bubble can actually be really harmful to a jelly. So when you pour in the brine shrimp, it's really important that you avoid pouring it over or into any jellies, especially being careful with any kind of air bubbles. They get strapped under their bell, that's not a good thing.
So you're just pouring them gentle, like you said, so that there's no bubbles being made.
Exactly. And so because this is an exhibit that visitors get to see, they'll actually get to see the brine shrimp being poured into this exhibit, and they get to see the jellies feed.
Awesome. Well, that's how you feed the jellies here. Perfect. What's next?
Then we'll be moving on to the microhabitats and all the tiny little filter feeders that live in there.
And those aren't here in West Curatorial. We're going to have to kind of go for a walk. We'll see you there. Now we're back still behind the scenes, but this is the micro habitats from the back. And so you're just gonna kind of go down. Not all of them need the brine shrimp, so you sort of know what's in each one. So I guess if you just kind of give us an idea which one we're feeding when we do. Sweet, yeah, let's see what we got.
So the first one is MH3, microhabitat 3. It's got a sandy bottom environment with our sea pens in here. They're currently all shrunken back into the substrate, so they probably won't be feeding this time around, but typically there are 8 or 9 of them all pluming out, and they'll all kind of feed on the filter feeders.
Yeah, the sea pens like to tuck on back, and so a lot of times folks walk past that microhab and they're like, nothing's in there.
Right.
And then like a half hour later, it'll be these sea pens out.
And in MH5, we kind of have like a cobbly, rocky environment. We have some zoanthids, some scallops. Those are the main filter feeders that are in here. Rock scallops and pink scallops. And then finally down at MH8, kind of like a kelp forest themed tank down here with some hairy tunicates that love to eat brine. And they're actually pretty difficult to keep alive, so I give them a little bit extra TLC by giving them a little bit more brine than the other ones.
All right, well, that has been the I don't know, brine circuit. Is this a race that we should make y'all do?
Yeah.
See who can do it the fastest. But that is how we feed a lot of the smaller mouths here at SeaLife Center, our filter feeders or just small critters. And there are others occasionally. If you've got, baby fish, I imagine, would eat this sort of stuff too.
Right.
So if you're ever curious, when you're really teeny tiny, what do you eat? Probably brine shrimp here at the SeaLife Center. All right, so that was how we feed those brine shrimp out. And yeah, it mostly just uses a turkey baster, kind of a large version of that pipette that I used to put out our brine shrimp on the microscope earlier. And we can cut back over to the microscope here just to see those brine shrimp. Again, Nopli, the little larval brine shrimp, kind of cruising around in there. It's a very juddery motion. They're not particularly smooth swimmers at this stage in their life, but once they're adults, they do kind of get a little more smooth. But again, we don't have those brine shrimp here usually. Typically, they are just eaten by our filter feeders at the SeaLife Center. Now, this is going to be our little Q&A time, so if anyone's got any questions about either raising out these brine shrimp, the animals that eat them, or any other question kind of pertaining to today's episode or today's virtual visit, you go ahead and type that in the chat, or again, we do have a little text number down in the description below, and you can text that to us. But one of the questions that I've always gotten when we start talking about brine shrimp, or if people see our brine shrimp here, is that it looks kind of like a sea monkey that they might have had as a kid. And as we mentioned, yes, sea monkeys are brine shrimp. For anyone that's like, Alex, what, you keep talking about sea monkeys. What are sea monkeys? So they were, as I've said, just brine shrimp, but you could order them from maybe the back of a magazine or a comic book. They would, the amazing sea monkeys, it would say, oh, you could teach them to do tricks. They would come in like a little container, kind of with like a plastic aquarium castle in there. Now, the tricks that you could teach them to do, because believe it or not, you could kind of teach them to do something, is you could have them go through a little hoop. The way you did that is the same way that Leo harvested those brine shrimp in our videos earlier today. You would use a light, because brine shrimp are attracted to light. And so if you put a light on one side of a little brine shrimp tank, they will kind of cruise across the tank over towards that light, and you could move it over to the other side, and they would cruise there as well. Looks like we might have a question.
All right, Alex, we have a question. How big do brine shrimp get if they reach adulthood?
All right, great question. How big do brine shrimp get if they reach adulthood? I mean, they're still going to be very small. For the most part, they're these little plankton, like pretty small, like about the size of, if you have like a freshly sharpened pencil, the lead at the end there, the graphite at the end there. That's kind of a decent size, or like a piece of rice, a big piece of rice might be. Now, I have seen some get a little larger than that if they really make it. Now, I was one of those kids, I had sea monkeys as a kid, and mine never really got that big. Another creature I had, this is like a whole type of pet, I guess, is a tadpole shrimp, which is another shrimp that you can hatch out of these little desiccated eggs. And the thing between brine shrimp or tadpole shrimp is that these eggs can go a very long time from when they are laid to when they hatch. And that's, I think, what kind of made them interesting to a lot of folks, is like this miracle pet, is that you just get this little, I don't know, it looks like if you got like a little spice packet or something with your pizza that you could tear open, and there's little pepper flakes in there. It's basically the little packet you got. You tore it open, you added it in the water, it looked like dust, and then like 2 or 3 days later, there were these little specks visibly moving around in the water. And the reason they can do that, the reason those eggs can go so long, is that those species, those animals, need to be able to survive long stretches of time where the pools that they live in are dried out. As I mentioned before, that life cycle picture that we have, that's actually from the Utah Division of Wildlife Management. And in Utah, of course, they have the Salt Lake. Now, the Salt Lake is too salty for fish, which makes this actually a great spot for brine shrimp. One, because obviously it's very briny, but two, there's not a lot in the way of predators there for those brine shrimp. However, the Salt Lake kind of does dry, and then it fills and it dries. There's sort of, it's not a tide, but there's sort of this cycle of the water pulling back from the shore there, sometimes for very long periods of time, especially if you're in drought. And so these eggs are meant to be able to survive those long periods of time in between being laid and hatching, where there just might not be water there. Do we have any other questions over there? No? I'm going to look at my chat here. Oh, the chat was, how big do they get? Now, the tadpole shrimp I have, that's something I would encourage anyone to look up. They also were sold as triops, T-R-I-O-P-S, and they look like little horseshoe crabs. It looks like maybe we do have a question.
Yes, Sadie from California would like to know where brine shrimp can be found in the wild.
So Sadie from California wants to know, where can you find them? And as was mentioned, Salt Lake in Utah has them, but there are different species of this sort of thing that can be found all around. In fact, there are tadpole shrimp that even live here in Alaska that'll be found up in some of the tundra marshes, that sort of thing, up in the pools there. And that's one of the things that we have, sea ducks like our eiders that fly up to those marshes. They make a great snack for those birds that show up there. And you can find different types of brine shrimp or brine shrimp adjacent invertebrates around the world. Dry areas do tend to have these kind of more miraculous ones that can dry out fully, and their eggs can last a very long time before they get water added to them. And I believe, if you're interested in raising these yourself, they do still just sell sea monkey kits. Now here at the SeaLife Center, we're not buying like 1,000 sea monkey kits and emptying them out. You actually saw Leo pour out the eggs in one of those clips, and we just have like a big container of just brine shrimp eggs. So, any other questions there, Laura? All right. Well, it looks like that's it for our Q&A today. I hope you had a good time kind of seeing this strange animal. It is in our aquariums. We do raise them here. We hatch them out. They're easily the smallest egg that we are deliberately hatching here at the SeaLife Center. But it is ultimately to become food for some of our smaller mouths and smaller feeding apparatuses here at the SeaLife Center. So if you're a little animal with a tiny mouth or maybe some feeding tentacles, you might need something like brine shrimp. Oh, last minute question?
Do any cultures eat brine shrimp?
Oh my gosh, do any cultures eat brine shrimp? Not that I am aware of. That being said, you would need a lot of them. Now, they are really easy to culture, so I could see, you could probably raise them out and then filter out that water, and you'd have sort of this like arthropod mush. I don't know if anyone does deliberately eat them, but it is certainly something that's cultured out. Most of what I hear about it is culturing for the feeding of other animals, or again, as someone's strange on the shelf pet, perhaps around holiday time. All right, well, with that, we're going to once again thank our sponsors for these. So this year, Royal Caribbean Group and the Alaska Travel Industry Association Foundation have actually sponsored these videos, which means that we can bring them free to the public, which is fantastic. And we always want to thank folks that tuned in last year for our kind of first couple virtual visits, because you really showed that this was something we could be doing to get our messaging out there and make sure that even if you can't visit Alaska in person, you can hopefully visit virtually. And so with that, I will thank you all for tuning in today. And we're going to leave you with a goodbye and hope we see you on the virtual visit next week.